I have been in enterprise software for 30 years. I'm a technical founder. Started at Apple Computer back in 1991. And along my path, I actually participated in a company and designed a pricing engine that I can say that at one point, 35% of all the mortgages in the US, residential mortgages, were priced through our engine. So had a pretty big impact at the time, eventually got acquired by Fiserv. So I have a little bit of financial services background, but I'm really a technical information designer. What is Flow? I think that Ed set it up nicely. It's a data communication system. It's tools for you and for partners like Get Real to put together presentations that really help an audience build a good mental model. You know, we actually do think in 3D. It's the way our brains work. You get into all the brain science about the hippocampus and spatial reasoning and all those things, but if we can help you build a good mental model in the minds of your audience, then that's gold, right? That's value. And that mental model helps them make better decisions. Those data-driven decisions hopefully help solve the world's problems. In a way, it's kind of a sci-fi vision, right? I mean, is it Tony Stark, you know, flicking atoms and manipulating his data in augmented reality in front of him? Well, yeah, it is, but it's practical. We've done all of the detailed work. That's why I emphasize my enterprise software roots. All of the detailed work to make sure that it's secure, that it's works into your daily workflow, that everything we do is easily modifiable and changeable because you want to tweak it for tomorrow's meeting. How do you build a system like that that really meets the practical needs? And that's what we've built. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michael to actually start to show it, because who wants to talk about something so visual?
Well, fortunately, you get to hear me talk just a little bit more, then we'll show you some good stuff here. So I'm Michael DiBenigno, one of the co-founders of Flow, and I like to say I'm a recovering management consultant. Prior to my time here at Flow, I was at Deloitte Consulting and was a manager out of the strategy practice. And I got to experience the problem firsthand. You know, on our client engagements, it really wasn't finding the insights that was the hard part. The hard part was, how do we effectively communicate this to executives in a way that is understandable and actually enacts change and makes the millions that they spent on these projects worth it, right? That was really the thing we kept churning. And so I think I reached my max limit of copying Tableau screenshots, pasting it into PowerPoint, adding some circles and annotations and calling that a data story and a really compelling argument. And so Flow is this next iteration of how we more effectively communicate with data at its core. Prior to my time there, I was at MIT, and prior to that was also in consulting. So I've always sort of played at this intersection of business and technology. So what we're solving for at Flow ultimately is, how do we communicate with data, right? That's our core thing. And it's about communicating to a non-expert audience. That's an important detail. We're not talking about expert to expert communication. We're talking about an expert or a non-expert communicating to a non-expert. And ultimately, there's three things we solve for. One is levels of engagement in a meeting. Two is levels of understanding. Do you actually understand the content, or are you sort of just nodding along? And then three is levels of interaction. Are you paying attention, or are you checking your email, doing other things, and not fully there? And so ultimately, if you're able to solve for these things, that's how you help to drive better data-driven decisions, and in a sales use case, more sales conversions. And we do that through data storytelling. So data storytelling brings narrative with data visualization. It's marrying those two together. The narrative, the presentation layer, is the story. It's the thing people will remember. And that emotional response goes to the narrative. But without the data, it's just an antidote, right? And so the data helps support the argument and add sort of the logical side. And so by combining those together, you form this very compelling argument, and that's how you drive things forward. You know, in the time I left Deloitte, actually Deloitte has started their own data storytelling practice, which is very fulfilling to see that come through. And so to help illustrate that, let's actually see a data story. And so I'm just going to do a very basic example here, which is, back in 2016, Donald Trump would look at a map like this, and he would say that the whole country voted red. That if you look at the county election results, you see it's just a sea of red. But that the counter argument to that is that land doesn't vote, people vote. And so if we adjust the magnitudes of these lines, we see a very different story emerge, one in which the population centers of the US mostly vote Democrat. But let's take this to another step, which is to get you involved, to actually interact. So what I'm going to do is in the chat window, I just placed a link. If I can encourage people to click on that link, that will actually open up your own browser window, and you'll actually be part of this live meeting. So here we are. It's like I was going to say a meeting within a meeting, but it's not quite like that. So I see people joining in. And so as you join, if I can encourage you to click and drag your mouse, you will start to rotate around the scene. And there's some things you can do here, right? You can actually point and interact with the dots to pull up some additional information. Obviously, there's a lot more details that we could go into, and this is a very basic example. But I do want to point out some of these small things, which is, one, when people actually get to engage with the content, it changes the meaning of feeling like you're part of the meeting. It actually feels like you're there. And even to a non-expert, to just be able to point to a dot, like you're pointing into Cook County, that you can see what I'm pointing at, that I can see what you're looking at, that's how we start to empower those that are not necessarily experts in data or understand it fully, to just be able to point to something. I can point to it and ask about it, as opposed to needing to, ask a complicated series of questions to get to it. And let me take this one step further, which is to change the color of these dots so that it's more representative of the ratio of Democrats and Republicans, less binary and more purple, essentially. So all of this to say, I'm not trying to have a deep political conversation with everyone here, but really just to help show how showing data through different lenses allows you to understand it in a different way. And all of those different ways help you codify your mental image of understanding, in this case, election results and how it differs across the country and how it differs between rural and urban areas. But also that it's not necessarily that binary, right? That all of these contribute to it. And so let me take it one step further, which is to also show you this QR code. So if you look back at the screen share on Zoom, you'll see a QR code. And for those that have their cell phone handy, I'd encourage you to actually point your cell phone camera to that QR code, which will then pull up this flow on your phone as well. Because one thing that we very much hold true is that we always want to meet people where they are in terms of technology adoption. So we work amazing on flat screens, on phones, in mobile AR, in VR, in AR, sort of all these modalities, but we want to meet someone where they are, not force them into an XR experience. And so as I go through here, let's just extend this idea of what do we mean? What is data, right? Sure, I showed you this geospatial data, but one of the more popular examples that we told a data story around was, how does disease propagate through a population? And so this is sort of the mathematical representation of a network graph of how you would expect disease to propagate, and actually how disease actually propagates. It looks much different than this, and it's a really interesting story that we can get into. But that idea that it's not just geospatial, but also time series data. Here we're looking at foot traffic data for 5 major retailers for last year. What happened last year? And if we look, we see this huge decline in foot traffic everywhere in March as the pandemic hit, pretty much except for Costco, where we all stocked up on toilet paper. And then that summer, we all went to Home Depot, apparently, after noticing all the defects in our house. And that, each of these lines tells a story. And that story connects you to understanding this data in a different way, in a different dimension, and influences the decisions you make. So if you think about in the financial sense, leading a client through a story, they're going to remember that story, especially if you're able to interact with them, to have this engaging conversation around the data. That's what we're driving. So we're not trying to be another dashboard. We are really trying to help enact change, because I think the only way that we are going to move forward as a society is how do we communicate more effectively with the data we have. It's not about necessarily adding more data into the repository. So I will pause there. I know I went through it quite a bit, but would love to field any questions or any additional commentary, Rob or Ed or Jason.
So just if anybody has any questions, we'll keep rolling. But here, if anybody has any questions, you can post them into the chat and we'll answer them. I know that Jason was going to be queuing up another demo on his own, so maybe we can pass the mic over to Jason to take over from there.
Yeah, so just back to what Michael was showing. So there is an AR button on the phone, and on an iPhone, it takes another couple of steps. You need to download the WebXR viewer from Mozilla, and on Android, it just works natively in Chrome. If we have time, a little bit more time at the end, maybe we'll take questions and see if, get people through the, have them experience the AR version. I see some people walking around. You can actually see the way their icons move that they're in AR because of, so I see some people doing that. So I think let's try to come back to getting everybody or more of us into AR a little bit later.
Yeah, and on that point, just to illustrate sort of, on the AR front, one thing that we can do when we do these AR videos is actually create AR videos. And as a way to once again, sort of share your message as the core idea, these have been extremely popular. In a 3-month period, we got 9 million views of videos like this. And that idea of how can I effectively communicate, not just in meetings, but outside the meeting using this tech is also a big part of this. So I'll just sort of tease that. And so when we get to the AR, that will click in terms of how this all impacts. But sorry to interrupt you, Jason, back to you.
Love it. Michael is a TikTok god, you guys. If any of you know TikTok, or look up the data guy, and you'll see his creations. I want to bring it back a little bit more to financial services a bit. And so this is an example of a flow we created for Blackrock. So what we're actually seeing is 12 weeks of 40 lifestyle brands. And this is the net sentiment analysis looking across social media. So you can see that, Hanes actually has a pretty negative.
And I'm gonna just stop real. So I'm gonna end this live meeting for everyone that's in it, and we're actually gonna look back at the Zoom screen because Jason's sharing his screen. So I know people are still looking around here, but I'm gonna end this little session so people refocus on you, Jason. So back to you.
Sure. And so in this example, the more red and the lower it is, the less positive the sentiment. And you see Hanes is probably, not doing so well. And so this was a piece specifically for registered investment advisors in order to give them some tools to walk through with their clients why Blackrock was different than their competitors. And in fact, the CIO of the active equities group at Blackrock told us that, everybody says the same things when we market, that we all have the same bullet points, we all have the same marketing messages. You guys help us show how Blackrock is different, by getting them to understand the data and the story behind what we do. I'm gonna go through 3 more steps here. You can see that this is we did this a little while ago now, but you can see that there was a huge negative spike in Nike sentiment in September of 2018. And correspondingly, switching the axis, there's a huge increase in negative social media. So let's dive into that dot, so to speak, and see what that meant. So here we're looking at just Blackrock, just Nike sentiment, and you can over a year, and you can see this huge spike on this particular couple of days. And what were they talking about? Well, let's just step right into it and experience it. This is a word cloud, and yes, it was the Colin Kaepernick ad campaign that they presented. So if you're using an AI, you might say, gee, the posts went way up, the sentiment dropped way down, maybe the AI should sell some stock. Well, did it affect the stock price? Well, yeah, there was a little negative drop, this purple line here. You can zoom in a little bit to see it, but it recovered quickly and wasn't really a big deal. And the purple line is Nike versus the rest of the market at this time. So it's not only hard numbers. And here's where you would want to zoom out and understand that Nike built their brand by doing controversial ads. Even their first ad over here, the first Just Do It campaign in July of 1988, it actually addressed ageism. It was an 80-year-old marathon runner. And now we're kind of used to that, but back in '88, that was not considered a healthy thing to do. And they had a lot of negative, they got a lot of negative pushback from doing that. That is how they built their brands. I'm going to, it was quite well received. It was actually a production that was done on, projected on a great big screen in a live audience, as well as the whole audience looked at it on their phones simultaneously. And we actually had some VR headsets off to the side so people could explore that later too. I'm going to stop there and hand it back to Ed.
Okay, great. We got a question. Steve's got a question. Steve, I'm going to unmute you here. Your question for the group.
All right. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're good.
Great. Can you just talk about how you go about building one of these for if a company were interested in it, what, potentially Get Real's role is, just how does it come together?
So we're really excited about Get Real as a partner on this because so far, we started the business self-funding and funding through our customers. And that was necessarily had a lot of services component to it. And now that we've built a better set of self-service tools and working with partners, experts in their respective industries like Get Real and financial services, really expands, what Flow can accomplish for the world. So essentially the process is either Get Real, in this case, Get Real identifies, starts to have some conversations, starts to introduce what's possible and brainstorms a little bit, comes to us, we get involved together, we understand if all the technological bits are already built to do what needs to be done, which most of the time they are. Sometimes we extend things for specific customers. And yeah, together just make sure we've really well addressed the audience, the playback modalities. Is this going to be a webinar? Is this going to be embedded on a web page? Is this meant for people to experience as an augmented reality system, or even potentially VR? It works beautifully in VR, even though we don't promote that much. It's not as practical as some of these other modalities, but it is a gorgeous experience. We really enjoy that. And once we work through the audience and the different modalities and the goals, usually it's about 30 days from start to finish. Some things can go much quicker if there's a tight deadline, and sometimes it takes longer. And the end result is quote a presentation, but it's built to be highly modifiable and continue to be reused and reworked, and so you can customize it for additional audiences. And for something like showing someone's portfolio, the data can be updated all the time, and so that presentation is always fresh.
Yeah. And just to maybe put a bow on what Jason was describing, so there's two ways. One is this more consultative manner where we will work with you hand in hand to build out those visualizations. And we typically always start with customers in that realm, and Get Real is a partner of ours, certified, and they build these amazing flows as well. But along the way, we are releasing our self-service platform, and I'm happy to do a quick demo of that. Jason, just to quickly codify in people's minds what the Flow editor does, because that's the other use case that we are pushing more customers towards. So I can just quickly show that. So this is the Flow editor. So this is also just a website. So this is the web you go to. You can add your data in, so upload it as a CSV, or we can build data connections to an organization's data. And then what I'm going to do is create a swarm, which is our main data visualization elements. And right away, you're seeing every dot come into place here. Each dot is a thing. It is a row of the data set. And what I'll do is add a step, which is the equivalent of adding a keyframe in an animation. And then I'll actually add or start to make some logic to this, the data. And so I'll put the year on the horizontal axis, life expectancy on the vertical, and I'll put the different countries on the depth axis. And so right away, we're starting to see this shape come about. And we're looking at life expectancy over the last 200 years. And in many ways, this is humanity's greatest success, that we live longer, our children are more likely to survive. But then also within this data, we also have some of humanity's biggest failures. There's more we can do here, so we can change the scale of the dots. We can add in a color scheme based on something like the continent. And then let me add one last step, realizing that the main focus of this is less on the visual I'm creating and more on the process. So I'm not going to focus too much on really adding too much here, but I'll just add one small thing, which is just to look at the last pandemic. And we look at the years that are between 1915 and 1920, we'll see this huge decline in life expectancy throughout the world. And that was the last pandemic to hit. And so all that said, I'm setting camera positions, the idea that I hit save, publish, and share. And now, just like before, this is live on the web. We can host a live meeting with it. We can create AR videos. We can create all these different assets from it. Is enabled. So I know we went really in depth on that response, but I think understanding sort of how we create these is pretty crucial to understand how it can be used on a scalable way throughout an organization, but that we also have the more consultative approach and partners that can build these amazing flows to start.
Thanks, Michael, Jason. Steve, thanks for the question. I want to pivot a little bit since we kind of touched a little bit on financial services, and we do have several members of the audience that are from that walk of life. And maybe get Rob to weigh in on a couple things, from the Get Real perspective, from his perspective as a business owner and 30 years in trading and capital markets. But I don't know, Rob, talk to me a little bit about kind of when you first saw Flow, what kind of caught your eye and where you thought your mind went to on some of the use cases and some of the problems you were trying to solve.
Sure. Thanks everybody for being here today. I think, so I first saw Flow a little over a year ago, and there were a couple things that jumped out at me right away. Number one was the sheer volume of information that you could see or at the same time. And it wasn't, bounded by a frame, as it were, or a screen. These flows could be as big as you want. They could be like a football field of information. And that was the first thing that really struck me, because I feel that throughout my career in financial services, I was always struggling to try to get more information into smaller and smaller places for the things that hadn't been yet figured out how to make algorithmic or automated in nature. And so trying to get it so that myself and my colleagues were able to see everything we needed to see to make a decision without having to go look something up or flip to another chart or another screen was always a challenge. And so that was the first thing that struck me as it related to Flow, is just how much the sheer volume of information that we could see at the same time. The second thing that jumped out at me, and it showed through a little bit in the demo that Michael did, as folks were pointing at stuff. This was the first time, it was the first time in my life that I knew in a presentation what people were at least wondering about when they were using their laser pointers without, I knew what they were thinking about before they said anything, before they raised their hand, before they weighed in. I could see what they were focused on. And so then I think when I later on, rolled the clock forward a couple months, and I was doing one of these flows myself and presenting, and it hit me kind of in a new way then, where I was able to almost anticipate what people were thinking about and draw them into the conversation with, hey, I saw that you were looking at whatever. And I found that to be really kind of striking and powerful. So those are the first two things that struck me when I saw Flow the first time.
Rob, before I get to this next demo, I want you to just talk to me a little bit about kind of the time series aspect of data and how that shows in Flow and how that connected to kind of maybe the example that we're going to show here in a moment or two.
Sure. I mean, obviously, financial services is so dependent on time series data, whether it's to look at past performance or returns or evaluate a model. having an additional dimension, a third dimension, and to do it in a fairly intuitive way, as Flow does, is like really helpful for that. I think it also, a lot of times, presentations of time series data so often, I think, at least in my experience, get bogged down. And again, just like the sheer volume of information that it's just, they try to do too much. And so Flow has this ability to both be kind of high level, it's been described as forests, trees, and the leaves. And financial services folks, in my experience, are very good and very willing to dive into the most granular of the data to see whether the higher level assessments or conclusions that are being drawn or represented, if it's somebody that's presenting to, whether it actually ties out. And so Flow has this capability to get in and see exactly what the data, what the instance of the data is, or you don't have to display that, and you just kind of see it at a higher level, which then I guess also highlights this, and maybe some of you were doing it on the two demos earlier, where the ability to change your perspective and kind of like walk around the data or have a different angle. And it reminds me, one of the things I did again the first time that I saw Flow was I went way far away from the data. Everybody else was kind of like, I was able to just kind of like look down at everybody else looking at the presentation. And I went, 30,000 feet up figuratively. And it did give me a different kind of orientation and understanding of the data. So when it comes to time series data, I find that to be a really helpful way to think about time series data, is just to kind of get away from it in a way, and especially if you have a graphical representation to be able to leverage. So I think you're going to show a demo here of one that shows that.
We're going to do another AR demo here. So this is a flow that I'm going to share my screen on here. Bear with me one moment. So everyone should see this QR code coming up. So this is one of the first, really the first flows that Get Real put together when we had this kind of target market involved and thought about some of our past lives. It's kind of cut from the perspective of an RIA and some portfolio analysis and ways that you would make a presentation to a client or a potential client to try to influence behavior. And so if people want to scan that code and you can get in, I'll give it another few seconds. I see some other people coming in right now. I'll give you just another 10 seconds to come in. Okay. So same as before, as we're pinching and pulling and dragging as you come in here. We started out with just the basic look of what a 2020 market, what the market did in 2020. So if you think about it, here's just, change our view around, but here's just a sample of 9 different asset classes that you could be invested in, whether it be spiders, whether it be mid caps, small caps, emerging markets, some credits, some bond funds, even a sample 60-40 portfolio. And we can test and see how that portfolio did during all of 2020. And you can see obviously the big drop down when the pandemic hit, and some stocks came back quicker, some asset classes came back quicker than others. But that's not the whole story of the market. We had a portfolio involved in all this. So we took a hypothetical $1 million portfolio and we were able to show, okay, well, that's what this portfolio did. It, hit a low point here, down 19%. And at the end of March, when we were all wondering what the world was going to look like, it slowly started coming back. And then second half of the year, it roared back, much like the rest of the market did. And you can see kind of at each step of the way what that portfolio did. But let's go back inside that portfolio and understand kind of what made up that performance throughout the year, so we can expand. And now we have kind of what this portfolio held. And you can see, well, there's some reasons why it did really well. It's got some Amazon, it's got some Apple, had some Tesla, somehow was stuck with some Philip Morris from maybe the grandfather left them 50 years ago. Some spiders, some Qs, so a little bit tech heavy and a little bit of bond portfolio there as well. but each individually, you can see how they performed over the course of the year. I like to sometimes get right down in the canyon here to remind myself how low things actually got. So story of performance, much different. And really, as you kind of cull back out, or you can zoom to the top, you really see what happened with Tesla throughout the year and how much that dramatically outperformed the whole market. So naturally, if I'm an advisor and I'm meeting with a client on the portfolio, I'm going to overlay some sort of amount of portfolio weightings. So we start out with our portfolio weightings at the beginning of the year with these pink overlines. And we can see, yeah, we were really good. We didn't hold any more than 5% of an individual stock, and maybe 20% in some of the indexes, 25% in Qs. And we thought this portfolio, for whatever our meeting and our strategy was balanced. And then sure enough, at the end of the year, what happens? Well, you see that stocks like Tesla now represent 25% of the portfolio because of the run they had. So this is an obvious rebalance situation where we'd be trying to get our client to sell some of this big winner, lock in some of the profit. And how we might think about showing that would be moving this forward, saying like, let's try to get you, flag this portfolio as unbalanced. Let's try to get you to rebalance and sell. Let's model a hypothetical. You can see it here as I pull the screen out, a hypothetical 50% retracement in Tesla. So some tweet goes out or something happens with the SEC and Tesla falls back 50%. We can clearly show this portfolio loses $210,000 off its highs. And if we were to say, well, let's go and try to rebalance this portfolio under the same drop in Tesla, we cut back everything back to its target at the beginning of the year, its target weighting. So we bring Tesla back to 5% of the portfolio. We drop that same retracement in on Tesla, and the portfolio loses only $41,000. So we save over $175,000, roughly. A simple example that we kind of cherry picked for our example to talk about, but certainly any sort of client communication around portfolios or proprietary risk or overall market performance or sectors, weightings, also shows very well in flow and can help give some relevant understanding to someone who may not be as sophisticated in the market, someone who is used to viewing things more visually, someone who's not going to respond to a deck, as opposed to someone who might, be interested in being able to have this come to life necessarily in their living room or in their office or in their as they're watching TV and how they can view their portfolio. So I'll pause that share there, and I will throw it back to Rob here for, or really Jason or Michael or Rob, any comments that you thought as we just went through some of those examples as well.
I'll try to
jump in with, go ahead, Jason.
Jason,
just a short comment, which is that, I mean, what would have that been? 80 pages of PowerPoint printouts?
It could have been 25 pages with, can you take me back to page 4? And then now can you move me up to page 20 and back and forth, and the chance of, and then try doing that on Zoom.
And each time you do that, I want to talk about the mental model for a minute. Each time you turn a page, each time you take a PowerPoint deck and you go to a new slide, you're flushing your visual cortex, which is something that our spatial brains hate. And it's you're trying to build a mental model, and the only way you can do it is by remembering what you saw before and then what you see now. And it's really quick to get very confused and exhausted. I'm sure I'm not an investment advisor, but I've sat through investment advisor meetings as the client, and I find them exhausting. My brain hurts trying to keep all of this straight. And a way that you can maintain the context, both with the animation and with layering of data, is just an important piece of what we built here. We really have tried to think about the brain science on why this works and why it is better than a PowerPoint deck.
Robbie, you were going to say?
Yeah, I was actually going to make a comment not on that per se, but actually not entirely unrelated, because I was going to make a comment about how, like, our brains actually identify exceptions extraordinarily quickly when they are presented graphically. And so, of course, all of our eyes go to, well, what is that stock that just, is going through the moon there, Tesla, or what's going on with this down move here all in March, and how synced up are they all? It's like our eyes gravitate to that. Our brain works well in that if it has a chance to, right? So, for instance, I wish I'd had, when we were running Spot, I wish we had access to like trade exception reporting, for instance, or that was done in a graphical way like this, as opposed to a more tabular fashion, or really any type of performance metrics, trade analysis, any of that type of stuff would all be really well suited to do it, to assess in a graphically oriented exception, facilitated way.
And I was just going to add one last thing to this conversation, which is to say that, this example is actually a very good example to point to flow and some of the experimentation we've done for things that can only be seen in 3 dimensions. So what I'm showing on my screen is the same thing you saw from Ed for the portfolio weights. This is on a 2D screen. So on the left is the starting portfolio weights, and then on the right is where they're currently are. And so the reason I'm showing this is that there are certain views like this where you can see the individual change in a stock as well as the contribution to the overall portfolio in the same view. And so I'm not showing this to say this is the best visualization we've ever made. That's not the point, but the point is just to say that there are visualizations that actually can only be done in 3 dimensions that enhance your understanding as you go through this topic. But I think that use cases we're just scratching the surface is how I look at it. So I'm excited to see where we can go together.
So I'll pivot there, and I'm going to show one more example here. And this one's going to be a video that we did at Get Real for the last one. We had a little fun with this on our team, and it's more of a it's less charts and graphs and less numerical data driven, and more kind of really gets to the heart of the visualization and what we can do. It touches a little bit on that exception reporting with Rob, so that Rob just talked about. So I'm actually going to end this other presentation that everyone's in, so we can bring people back to the screen. And I'm going to share my screen one last time and be ready to show a one sec. To share. And I'm going to share the sound.
Represents $1 billion. Already an unfathomable amount of money. Now let's use it to compare companies within the S&P. First, at $9 billion, we have Under Armour. At $12 billion, we have Gap. At $23 billion, we have Dish. At $36 billion, we have Hershey. At $47 billion, we have Walgreens. At $125 billion, we have Big Finance. At $400 billion, we have Big Retail. And finally, we have Big Tech.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, so Apple market cap never was so exciting or dramatic. Shout out to our Get Real team, Tyler and Nathan, for putting those together. And I'll put a link up to our YouTube channel afterwards, where we've created many more presentations that we'll be debuting in the coming weeks. We're also big classical music fans here at Get Real. So a simple presentation, we had some fun with it, but a nice way of showing really just any sort of concept that you want to talk in terms of scale, in terms of size, comparative nature, that we think. And so as Michael said earlier, really the possibilities are endless in terms of the amount of data that this audience and the world is sitting on, as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast or the webinar. And so being able to visualize that in short, brief ways, whether it be through the phone or whether it be through video or AR video, really has the ability to capture your brand, capture the message, and really nowhere more important than in financial services is where the customer or the client or the investment board or the investment committee need to understand. And the minute they don't understand, they glaze over, they don't approve, they don't buy. People feel stupid for asking questions. So, I've always felt like the community was really incented on having their audiences understand, whether they be simple concepts or very complex concepts in finance around products or around services, because if they didn't understand it, they wouldn't be able to buy it from you. And they wouldn't be able to participate or purchase that service. The examples that we showed earlier with the RIA, that's a basic example. Most portfolio rebalancing situations, they might be more complex than that. They might not be. But I think about all cases around risk management, around proprietary risk metrics, around scenario analysis towards goals. People have various different levels of financial literacy, and the ability to be able to communicate these concepts are vital to growing a business. I get beyond that, and with the AR version, or the AR QR code that we showed, I think about any sort of client communication that can go out. Attendant to that quarterly report or that annual report or that strategy document, or to the extent that your firm is engaged in thought leadership or wants to be a leader in market analysis. Think about what the column or the blog post or the web page that talks about current inflation rates or current Fed policy can be, if someone actually took the time to understand it. I know my experience with those topics can be pretty droll, can be very boring. And what if that had an attendant flow presentation that while someone listening to that conference call or reading that quarterly annual report from their advisor, from their investment firm, or from a thought leader in the marketplace, that they could be playing along almost multiplayer within their own phone, within their own tablet, in their own living room. So anytime you're trying to talk about proprietary products, proprietary funds, talking about large group presentations at seminars. I know I've got a follow-up question for Jason and Michael on modalities around flow. Just really internal and external communications around products and services in finance. Literacy is at low levels, and the ability to stand out, the ability to get your clients to understand, I think is super effective. That's why I know I've been super excited about flow and excited about the way that we can engage clients in building some of these with not only our expertise in financial services, but with the great tools that Jason and Michael are putting out. I'll pause there for any comments on that, and then I know we're getting close on time. I want to again ask the audience if they have any questions to post them in the Q&A or use the hand raise. But I'll allow Jason or Michael maybe to comment on any of the last pieces that I made, or Rob.
I'd like to hear questions, and particularly ideas about use cases. We're constantly learning new ways to approach this.
I've got a question here, Jason. Can you talk, and this is what I touched on just a moment ago. Can you talk about just the various different, we've talked about headsets, we've talked about AR, we're talking mobile. Can you talk about all the ways that Flow has been working to get these presentations into the hands of people that can use them and benefit?
Sure. We actually founded the company as a virtual reality company. And about a year ago, when we really got our Zoom integration together, we're literally using a tool right now, a software application that enables us to drop ourselves into the screen here. So that's part of our suite of products. When we started working on our Zoom integration, really focusing on the phone implementation and mobile AR, that's when the company took off. So virtual reality is an amazing experience. It's like what you just saw from that video, that was actually shot in virtual reality. And when you move your head and look up at these huge columns, you get a sense of feeling of the data that transcends what you can experience on a flat screen. You get some of that on the mobile AR, and that's exciting. But as exciting as VR is, our customers just weren't ready for it. And by doing these flat implementations, we've really hit a really nice groove. Starting at the UN development program, we were part of the UN General Assembly last fall, and that's just grown really well. So I'm just going to list them really quick, so you can just send somebody a URL and they can see it on their computer. They can see it on their phone. They can hit the mobile AR button on their phone. You can run a multi-user meeting and get people engaged in a variety of different environments. You can see it on a VR headset, and you can embed it in a web page. So what we've really focused on is, how do we make the entire experience as frictionless as possible? It's all just on the web. How do we enable people to get as deep an experience as they're willing to go based on the technology they have at hand?
Hey, Jason, could you comment on the data security piece, and also maybe it's related, the systems integration aspects of installations of Flow?
Sure. Sort of mentioned it earlier, because I know that security is a vital part of all our customers, but particularly financial services. We are just completing a security audit through Deloitte. So to have gone through that process successfully helps give us, of course, confidence on what we do. I have been in enterprise software for 30 years, including financial services. So I understand that the security part of the equation. And we built the company to be enterprise. We're not gamers trying to play. This is enterprise tools. On the back end, it's all currently hosted on AWS, using fully encrypted databases, et cetera, all of the security points that you would expect from a serious audit. But we also have built it so that it can be installed in your own data center. So either on premises or, different customers. We have one customer who would like us to move it to Azure, and we'll have no problem doing that. It's all built to be continuous integration, continuous development, such that a few scripts get run and all the servers get built and database is created, and away it goes.
Thank you.
Michael, I've got a question that I want to, yes, you got some TikTok shout out and social media shout out earlier from Jason as the data guy. Without asking to get into your alter personality, can you talk about just some of the, more broadly, the traction that you've seen in engagement from people as you've been able to experiment with the various social media platforms and using the AR videos and such, and just how that has, not only what that's meant for Flow's business, but really, I think that can be translated towards other people who might have that more external use case that they might want to market around data. So would love to hear kind of your thoughts on what you found out.
Absolutely. So in many ways, what we're presenting through these AR videos is everything we've seen in the movies. It's this data floating in front of us, and the Hans Rosling, presenting the data and telling the story, and you see it all in front of us. And that seems to resonate extremely strongly. And I think, just to give a case example of that resonance and where it ended up going, one of the data stories I presented was how COVID spreads through a population and tied to the R value. And so I built this, quick data model and visual that went with it, put it out there, and I think within 2 days, it was at 2 million views, which was crazy. Anyways, we got this huge following of people, that saw it. And then even from there, people from the IHME reached out, and then actually someone from the Texas Medical Center reached out, and they actually took that flow, adopted it for their own purposes, and actually presented it at the Texas Medical Center State of the TMC annual presentation as one of the visuals of how COVID is spreading. And that idea that it starts with just this spark, right? This spark of telling the story, of which it wasn't my story. It's just amplifying an epidemiologist's story. captivated audiences in a way that, made it understandable and approachable, whereas reading through the research of epidemiology is not quite as engaging. And so to reach that wide of an audience and then to get the attention, even through TikTok at the C-suite level of a very large medical organization, I think is testament to how far your message can really reach when it resonates and when you're broadcasting through a mechanism that is approachable.
Thanks, Michael. I know we're getting sensitive to, I'm sensitive to time here. We're getting close to the end of the hour and I don't want to go over. So number one, I want to thank Jason Marsh and Michael DiBeningo for spending all the time here with us, and their passion towards their product, the great things they're doing for business, and being the great partner they are for Get Real in terms of what we can bring to our clients going forward. So thank you both for your time and your participation. I want to put a huge thank you to also the audience today. I know your time is busy and there are a million different things. People in financial services get sold software tens of times per day. We hope we've struck a nerve with you, and we hope we got you thinking, if you weren't before, thinking more about your data and how it's presented, not how it's analyzed, not how it's mined, not how it's stored, but how it's presented. And certainly if there's ways that Get Real or Flow can help, you can contact us through our website, through our email invitations that we have here. I've posted a link to our YouTube channel where you can see an archive of other examples of use cases of Flow videos. And so would hope that people can visit that to get a broader sense of some of the applications. We're all here happy to help. And I'll let my panelists say any final moments before I dismiss. Jason, are you good?
I've got 2 sentences I want to say, which is that Flow is not just cool, right? And what is cool? It's mastering control over your information. Tony Stark flicking his atoms, that's cool because it's mastering control. That control is efficiency of communication into the minds of your audience, and that's the gold. So it's really easy to go, oh, that's cool. Yeah, it is, but it's efficient communication is really meaningful. So that's my little closer idea for you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone. Look forward to talking in the coming days, and everyone enjoy the rest of your day. Really appreciate you attending this webinar today.